Prime Minister
President
Mark
Trump's
Carney of
trade
Canada,
war is
on March
heating up.
27,
The Canadian province of
2025,
Ontario says
confirmed
it
what
will
many
slap a
suspected,
25%
the long-standing
surcharge on
relationship between the two
electricity
countries may be
exported
coming to
the
an
US.
end.
In addition to
With
announcing
his
a fresh
forceful
round of
statements
tariffs
and
on
policy
auto
shifts,
imports that are going
Canada
to hit
is
next
sending a
week,
clear message.
U.S. President Donald Trump
The country
threatened to
will no
impose
longer be a passive
large-scale tariffs
participant
on
in U.S.
Canada
trade
and the
policies.
European Union
The
if they
first
work
major lever
together
in
to
Canada's arsenal is its energy resources, particularly its oil, natural gas, and electricity exports to the U.S. These resources are not just commodities, they are vital to the U.S. energy grid. Canada is the largest single foreign supplier of oil to the U.S., and recent figures show that Canadian crude oil exports are expected to exceed $130 billion in 2024. This makes Canada an irreplaceable part of the U.S. energy supply chain. However, the escalating tensions with Washington have prompted Canada to review its energy exports. On March 27, 2025, Prime Minister Carney declared that Canada holds the initiative in energy. This is a bold assertion, signaling Canada's readiness to use its vast energy reserves as leverage. If necessary, Ottawa is willing to curb its energy exports to the U.S., a move that would have devastating consequences on U.S. energy prices and availability. To put it into perspective, in 2024, Canada transferred about 35 terawatt-hours of electricity to the U.S., representing 20% of the energy consumption in several regions. Hydroelectric power, generated in Canada's cold northern climates, is sold at low prices to the U.S., helping to stabilize energy costs in many northern U.S. states. Canada is rich in hydroelectric potential, which makes it a critical player in North American energy markets. Should Canada decide to restrict electricity exports, it would be devastating for regions like New England, where electricity prices would skyrocket, directly impacting businesses and households. Furthermore, LNG, liquefied natural gas, exports to the U.S. are another crucial component of Canada's energy strategy. In 2024, Canada sent 9 billion cubic meters of LNG to the U.S., making it a key energy partner. Canada's natural gas is particularly vital in states such as California and New York, where energy demand is high. The growing political climate in Ottawa suggests that cutting off these energy supplies is not out of the question. There are growing whispers in Canadian political circles about re-evaluating trade agreements with the U.S., including electricity exports. If Ottawa moves to restrict or even eliminate these exports, the impact on U.S. businesses and consumers would be immediate and severe. It's a risky move for Canada, but one that signals its willingness to assert its power in the face of what it perceives as unfair trade practices. The automotive sector has long been a critical area of U.S.-Canada trade. In 2024 alone, Canadian automotive exports to the U.S. exceeded $8.6 billion, making it the second-largest trade relationship between the two nations. However, with the ongoing tariff war, this once solid partnership is under threat. Prime Minister Carney has been vocal about Canada's intention to reshape the automotive supply chain between the two countries. The Trump administration's tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum have already caused severe disruption in this trade. But Carney's government has made it clear that more retaliatory tariffs are on the horizon, specifically targeting U.S. electric car manufacturers. On March 28, 2025, Carney abruptly removed tax incentives for U.S. electric car companies, which immediately increased production costs for U.S. automakers. This is just the beginning. Experts predict that new tariffs will soon be imposed on automotive parts, a move that could disrupt production lines in Detroit. The automotive supply chain between the U.S. and Canada is highly interdependent. In 2024, Canada produced about 1.3 million vehicles, more than half of which were sent to the U.S. market. This creates a highly interconnected web where parts made in the U.S. are sent to Canada for final assembly, only to be re-exported to the U.S. The threat of tariffs on automotive parts is especially concerning for both Canadian and U.S. manufacturers. If Canada imposes these tariffs, it could lead to disruptions at assembly plants across Detroit and elsewhere, causing significant production delays. Canada's leverage here is crucial. It's about raising costs for U.S. manufacturers and sending a message that Canada will no longer tolerate unilateral tariffs. However, the real question is whether Canada's automotive industry can withstand the potential financial strain of these retaliatory tariffs. If car prices rise, consumers in both countries will feel the pinch. However, Carney's government seems prepared for the economic consequences, asserting that it is the U.S. tariffs that have led to this situation, not Canada's actions. While energy and automotive trade have dominated recent discussions, Canada's agriculture exports to the U.S. also form a critical pillar of their trade relationship. In 2024, the U.S. imported nearly $45 billion worth of agricultural products from Canada, including key items like wheat, canola, meat, and dairy products. These products are vital to the U.S. agricultural sector, especially in the livestock industry, where Canadian feed is a key component. Canola seed exports alone accounted for $6 billion in trade, and any disruption in this trade could have severe consequences for U.S. food prices. If Canada decides to impose tariffs or restrict exports of agricultural goods, it could lead to inflationary pressures on U.S. grocery stores, where Canadian wheat and dairy are staples. Prime Minister Carney's government has openly suggested that agriculture will not be spared in retaliation for the U.S. tariffs. On March 27, 2025, Carney told Parliament, "We will not be the only ones to pay the price of political pressure." He hinted at the possibility of new taxes on U.S. agricultural imports, which would send shockwaves through the U.S. farming community. U.S. farmers rely heavily on Canadian agricultural imports for their operations. If this supply chain is disrupted, prices on basic commodities like bread, milk, and meat could soar. Moreover, any restrictions on animal feed would devastate U.S. livestock production, leading to higher costs for farmers and potentially shortages in the market. Canada's leverage in this area is immense. The country has the ability to hurt U.S. consumers, but also increase the cost of living for Canadians. The bottom line? Both agriculture and automotive industries are critical to the prosperity of both countries, and any disruption in these sectors would lead to severe economic consequences. The economic ramifications of this trade conflict go far beyond just energy and agriculture. As of 2024, U.S. imports from Canada totaled over $421 billion, a significant chunk of which includes raw materials, energy, and automotive products. Canada's trade with the U.S. is highly integrated, and any attempt to disrupt this trade would cause severe economic pain on both sides. For the U.S. economy, a full-scale trade war with Canada could lead to higher costs for energy, automobile production, and food prices, leading to economic instability. Manufacturing in Detroit would be severely impacted if Canadian automotive parts are no longer available at the same cost. The agricultural sector in the U.S. would feel the pinch of rising commodity prices and feed shortages, resulting in higher grocery prices. On the other hand, Canada's economy faces its own risks. The U.S. remains Canada's largest trading partner, and losing access to the U.S. market would be catastrophic. Canada's dependency on the U.S. market for its energy exports and automotive parts makes it particularly vulnerable. Should Canada find itself without a market for these products, it would have to rely on alternative markets, which may not have the same purchasing power as the U.S. The long-term consequences could be felt in employment, inflation, and economic growth. Canada may experience higher unemployment rates in its manufacturing sectors, while the U.S. could face rising production costs and food insecurity. In the face of growing tensions, Canada is shifting its focus toward alternative trade partners. Prime Minister Carney has made it clear that Canada's future trade strategy will be about diversification, reducing its dependence on the U.S. As he stated on March 27, 2025, Canada is now reaching out to European and Asian markets for new trade agreements, particularly in the energy and automotive sectors. In recent talks with France and the UK, Carney expressed interest in securing new energy deals and automotive partnerships that will allow Canada to escape the shadow of the US market. European press outlets have already begun discussing Canada's potential to become more independent on the global stage as it moves away from the US. But the shift isn't without its risks. New markets may take time to develop, and Canada's economy could suffer in the short term. However, this strategy is about long-term survival, ensuring that Canada has alternatives in place should the U.S. continue down its protectionist path. As Canada pursues these alternative relationships, the U.S. could find itself increasingly isolated. European and Asian trade channels may well become the new frontier for Canada, leaving the U.S. to confront the consequences of its unilateral tariffs. Amidst rising tensions and the looming threat of trade wars, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is putting his words into action to protect and strengthen Canada's auto industry. On March 26, 2025, Carney announced a $2 billion Canadian investment fund aimed at bolstering Canada's automotive sector. The fund is designed to address the significant challenges that the industry faces due to U.S. tariffs on Canadian automotive products, including electric vehicle (EV) components. This move comes as part of Canada's broader strategy to shield its economy from the repercussions of U.S. protectionist policies. The auto industry is not only a major economic driver for Canada, contributing billions of dollars annually, but it also plays a crucial role in maintaining the country's manufacturing jobs and technological expertise. In light of the increased tariffs, this $2 billion fund will help Canadian automakers adjust to the new realities and transition toward a greener, more innovative future. Carney's initiative includes direct financial assistance to automobile manufacturers, supporting the shift towards the production of electric vehicles and clean energy technology. By boosting investments in innovation, Canada hopes to maintain its competitive edge in the global auto market, especially as other countries are ramping up their green car production. This funding also aims to encourage research and development within Canada, ensuring that the country can compete globally in a rapidly changing industry. Moreover, the fund will also target job creation, aiming to create new opportunities for workers in the EV sector. By fostering a sustainable manufacturing environment, the Canadian government is positioning itself as a leader in the clean energy revolution. The goal is to help Canada remain integral to the North American auto supply chain, despite the pressures from the ongoing trade tensions with the U.S. This strategic investment reflects Canada's proactive stance in the face of U.S. tariffs and its intention to preserve and expand its auto industry while contributing to the global transition towards sustainability. The fund is an essential part of the country's economic resilience strategy, ensuring that Canada's automotive sector remains a key player in North American and global markets. As the Canadian economy braces for the full impact of the trade war, the housing market is feeling the pinch. According to a recent Reuters poll, Canadian home prices are expected to lag behind inflation in 2025, a stark contrast to earlier predictions of a modest recovery. Home prices are now expected to rise by only 2.0% in 2025, significantly down from the 4.0% increase predicted earlier. This represents a serious setback for Canadian homeowners and the overall housing market sentiment. The country's housing market had already been struggling due to high mortgage rates and limited housing affordability, but the escalating trade tensions with the U.S. are now further exacerbating the situation. Economic uncertainty, brought on by the ongoing trade war, is making potential buyers cautious. Home sales have dropped sharply, reflecting consumer unease and concerns about future job security. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, which are traditionally hotspots for real estate activity, home prices are now expected to remain flat or even decline slightly. The uncertainty surrounding U.S.-Canada trade relations, especially with tariffs on automotive and agricultural products, has led to further stagnation in the housing market. In fact, some market experts predict a double-digit quarterly decline in Canadian home sales as consumer confidence falters. Economists suggest that the trade war's impact on the housing market is significant because of the interconnectedness between the two economies. Canada's reliance on the U.S. for exports, especially in the automotive and agricultural sectors, is causing widespread economic anxiety. When people feel uncertain about their job security or the broader economy, they are less likely to invest in long-term commitments, such as purchasing a home. The Bank of Canada has already cut interest rates by 225 basis points in an attempt to stimulate the economy, but despite these efforts, the housing market's response has been muted. The trade war, combined with the rising cost of living, is weighing heavily on Canadian consumers. While home prices are expected to rise slightly in 2025, they will still lag behind inflation, leaving homebuyers with fewer opportunities to enter the market. Moreover, interest rate cuts by the Bank of Canada have not been sufficient to offset the trade war's impact. As inflation continues to rise, real estate prices remain out of reach for many Canadians, especially first-time homebuyers. The ongoing economic uncertainties are prompting many to delay major financial decisions, including home purchases, until they gain more clarity about the future of U.S.-Canada relations. The Canada-U.S. trade war of 2025 is a battle over control, resources, and global influence. With energy, automotive, and agricultural trade at stake, both nations are holding their cards close as tensions rise. Will diplomacy prevail, or will this dispute escalate into a full-blown trade war? As Canada strategizes its next moves and the U.S. prepares for potential retaliation, one thing is clear: the future of North American trade relations is on the line. Stay tuned as we continue to follow this developing story and its potential impact on the global economy.